record. Are there any questions from last time? Did anybody think of anything that left them puzzled? We're going through a really difficult text, and it's incredibly important in terms of the process of trying to become enlightened. So we did the first verse, and I'll just say it again so those of you who missed it or to kind of catch up with where we are. It starts with an obeisance written by the translators. Reverence to the insight hero Manjushri. I bow to the Lord of the sages who proclaimed relativity, the way by which he abandoned real creation and destruction. So that's how Joseph Luiso translated this particular verse. And as I said last time, the word relativity that he uses, I understand why he uses it. For those of us who are Western, when we hear the term relativity, it conjures up Einstein and the theory of relativity, and that's like high science, you know. But the real word in Tibetan, I'll just switch over to the Tibetan, is here. Gangi ke dang jipa da suldi yini bongyur ba den ching jungwa is what the actual Tibetan is. And this is a translation from the Sanskrit. And so ten ching jungwa, as I said last time, the 10 stands for pratikya in Sanskrit. And that means that all entities are completely dependent on other things. Like if you take me, for example, you see an outline of a human here. And that is really a reconstruction through cyberspace of the appearance of what looks like a human. And cyberspace has done a good job replicating the sound coming out of my mouth, right? And those sounds have representation of words, right? But if you look in, maybe your first impression, if you don't think about it, oh, there's this guy, Wilson. We'll call him Wilson. We'll put a label on him, Wilson. But if you start to look beneath the surface of what constitutes Wilson, you'll find that that label depends on many, many, many things. There's the form aggregate of Wilson, the feeling aggregate, the discernment aggregate, the formational aggregate, the consciousness aggregate. There are all these different subdivisions of what have to take place for a moment arising of a valid basis that could be designated Wilson. So this word 10, which again in Sanskrit is pratikya, means dependent. And it shows that the original assessment that there's this real person there named Wilson, if you think about it deeply and you start to analyze all the dependent factors that produce a moment that could be labeled Wilson, that there's really no essential nature to that label, that being labeled Wilson. It's a completely dependent phenomena. So that's one side of it. And as I said last time, this is to refute two extreme points of view that get in the way of progress spiritually. One extreme point of view is called eternalism, and the other extreme view is called nihilism or nihilism. And we're going to go into depth, and the whole poem, the beginning of the poem, is Nagarjuna just focuses on those two extremes. So 10, pratitya, dependence, refutes the extreme of eternalism, where you think something exists from its own side and has its own nature. Ching means and, Jua means arise. And in Sanskrit, that word is samupadya, to arise. And that arising of this moment, of this being that you could label accurately Wilson, shows it gets rid of the other extreme, which is nihilism, to think things don't exist. And as I said last time, I think our Western culture, and in fact, the entire world, is caught between these two extreme viewpoints. If you take most religious folks, the sense of eternalism is very much there in the thinking and the creed and then the attitude. And there's some benefits to that. But if you take most non-religious folk, and right now the current state of scientific materialism, it's fallen into nihilism, where there's a sense that there's no right or wrong, that things are temporal and they're all material based. There's no real essential part of a being that moves forward after they die. And so you got to grab for all the things you want right now before you die. And it's like this scramble around the world for immediate gratification that comes out of a nihilistic point of view. So those are the two extremes that Nagarjuna is refuting here in his first verse. So other than that, I think the translation is pretty good that Joseph did. So just remember, whenever you see the word relativity in this translation, it's really talking about dependent origination. And there are lots of levels to dependent origination. So what does he mean that the Buddha, the Lord of Sages is the Buddha, abandoned real creation and destruction? That's going to be the subject matter as we move through the first several verses of this text. And we'll get into why it's so important for spiritual development. So let's go to the first verse. Those whose intellect transcends being and nothing and does not dwell between realize the meaning of condition, which is profound and non-perceived. So if you didn't have a commentary to this text, you'd read it and you just scratch your head like, what is he talking about? And so that's why we're very lucky to have a valid commentary to it. Chandrakirti's commentary is considered absolutely spot on. And then after Chandrakirti made his commentary, and that's, by the way, what Joseph translated. It's both the actual 60 verses as well as Chandrakirti's commentary. And then I was lucky to hear Jimmy Kensler Bichet give a commentary to this text that was translated by Art Engel, whose knowledge is just superb, and his Tibetan and Sanskrit are both very superb. So here's the verse in Tibetan. Kangi is by whom. Lodru is intelligence. It can mean mind, but it also means wisdom and intelligence. Yu means existent. Me means non-existent. Lay from those two extreme views. One is eternalistic, one's nihilistic. Non-parte means thoroughly gone beyond those two points of view. Xing En Minepa means not abiding in between them. So there's no confusion in the mind of somebody who's realized this both intellectually and then directly. Dedaki, by them, ni, Kengi Dun, they understand the meaning of conditional. Ken means conditional. They understand what that means. Thammo means the profound. And in this case, profound is talking about the view of the emptiness of self-nature in all phenomena. Mikme means without an object. And I mentioned when I started out by talking about this illusory image of Wilson talking to you, right? That on the surface, unexamined, it seems, yeah, there's a real dude there, right? But as you start to analyze all the different factors that bring this image from where I'm talking to where you're viewing, and the basis and all the factors that have to go into producing the basis for designation, and then the very fact that you're mentally ascribing Wilson to this image, right? There's another dependence there. Not only is all the things on the basis side that make it appear, but also on the perceiver's side that interpret what's appearing. So really, when you look at all those factors, the solidity and the sense that it exists independently you start to cut them away as you see the complexity of what's there. And that's the objectlessness of the phenomena. Number tok means thoroughly realized. And so he's starting out by talking about very exalted beings. These are beings who have seen emptiness directly and beyond. Those of you who know the Buddhist path, this will be very familiar territory. Those of you who are fairly new to it kind of not know what is being referred to. Within the practice of wisdom in Buddhism, there are what are called 5 paths. There's 5 paths of a hearer, 5 paths of a solitary realizer, and 5 paths of a bodhisattva. And they have a lot of similarities. The difference between those 3 sets of 5 paths has to do on the motivation. The motivation of a hearer is stop the world, I want off. This world is crazy, it's suffering, it's dangerous, I want to be free of it, right? And so that's the beginning motivation for a practitioner. A solitary realizer comes to those realizations on their own without needing a teacher in that life. A bodhisattva goes to the next step. Yeah, the world is crazy and beings are suffering and it's horrible. And I want to be free of that suffering myself. But if I just focus on my own suffering and I leave behind all these beings who are suffering just like me, who've traveled with me through life and death from beginningless time, who in many lifetimes have been my mom and have taken care of me with love and compassion like my mother in this life, if I just don't take care of them, that would be really horrible. And so not only am I going to work for my own freedom, but I'm going to work for full enlightenment so that I can bring all beings into safety and to an ultimate form of happiness beyond suffering. So those are the 3 levels of motivation. And you can tell that the last one I described is considered the highest motivation, the motivation of bodhicitta, the wish to become fully enlightened, to liberate all beings from suffering. And so when you get a true motivation like that, that's the first path, the path of accumulation. when your mind becomes thoroughly one-pointed on correct view, you enter the second path called the path of preparation. And when your mind goes from a conceptual correct understanding of reality into a direct experience of it, that's the third path. It's called the path of seeing. And from then on, you become called an Arya being, or a noble being who has started to work their way out from the cycle of existence, which we're going to talk about some. And then the last two paths are the path of meditation, in which you gradually, through that experience of direct experience of reality, you start to wear away the afflictions of mind that bind you. And you start on the bodhisattva path. You also simultaneously start to get rid of obstacles to direct knowledge until you reach the state of Buddhahood, in which there's omniscient mind, complete freedom, and ability to appear and teach and guide other beings to help them as well. So those beings who have seen emptiness, that third path of seeing and beyond, are what are being referred to here in this verse by Nagarjuna, which gets into a few concepts that you have to hold in mind if you're going to be able to understand this text and get some benefit from it. One thing, I was mentioning ascription, that there's a valid basis, and then there's a mind that ascribes something to it. This is called, in Tibetan, tenne tak. Ten is that word that I went over earlier, paticca in Sanskrit, dependence. And in this case, tenne tak, it's talking about the basis for you to ascribe something as existing. In this case, my example, here's this dude talking over the internet, right? That's the basis for designation, right? That's one part of the dependence. Tak means then from your side, as you perceive this shape and form and these sounds, there's a labeling process in which you mentally ascribe, oh, there's Wilson, or there's that dude talking, right? And so in the highest school of Buddhism, Buddhist philosophy is called prasangika madhyamaka, consequentialist middle way thinking. And this text is based on that viewpoint. There are lower schools, the schools that have thought that Nagarjuna is really addressing this text to are called the realists. And that includes two different schools, the Vaibhashika, or the analysts, and the Sautantrika, or the traditionalists. And there are different divisions of those two schools of Buddhist thought. So those two schools accept dependent origination. They accept that things are dependently arisen, and that beings therefore don't have a self nature to them. And that's how they liberate themselves, is by realizing that. However, their problem from a prasangika point of view is that they think that the beings that don't really have a self, but think they do have a self, right, who are cycling in samsara because of those beliefs, they believe that they have a real five aggregates of form, feelings, concepts, volitions, and awareness, sensory and mental awareness, and that those things are real. The Madhyamaka schools don't think those things are real. And we'll get into that, why they don't think those things have self-nature. And you'll see how Nagarjuna will argue that as long as you think they are real, you're going to cling to them, and that's going to keep you in samsara. And so those two schools, the realist schools of the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika, is who he's addressing this discourse to. Later, after Nagarjuna, two other schools arose in Buddhism. One of them was called the Yogacarya school, or the Chittamatra school. It's called the mind-only school. And they asserted the existence of what they called the Alaya Vijnana, or the storehouse consciousness that goes from life to life. And for them, they imputed some kind of self nature to that mental continuum that would go from life to life. They refuted the existence of outer phenomena. They believed outer phenomena were illusory, but they accepted the idea of this soul, if you will, that goes life to life. So the higher two schools, the Prasajika Madhyamaka, and there's another one called the Svatantrika Madhyamaka, they refuted that. Not only did those two higher schools not accept the realist schools of believing in a real inherent five aggregates, but they rejected the Yogacarya or Chittamatra sense that there's a real mind, a self-existent mind. Now, among those highest two school systems, the Svatantrika Madhyamaka and the Prasajika Madhyamaka, there was a little difference of opinion. And basically what it boils down to is the Prasajika, or the consequentialist school that Nagarjuna adhered to, thought that you could just describe an existence as something that's labeled based on that you can call an existence, something that exists based on what that Tibetan I mentioned to you, Tene Dak, which means a valid basis of inscription, and then an accurate comprehending mind ascribing something to that basis. And that's all you need to say something exists or doesn't exist. The Svatantrika Madhyamaka said, well, I think you need a little bit more to the basis of designation, that there is something about, like, for instance, if I hold up this cup, they said there's something from the side of this blue cup, some features to it that you have to admit exist from the side of the object. Whereas the Prasajikas would say no. So that's a basic disagreement, and we'll get into it and why those two arguments are there and what they mean. So if I haven't completely confused you, then we'll move forward. Those two highest schools of philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, both refute, in Tibetan, it's called Rongon Nam Madruba. Things do not exist from their own side. And so it's, both of them refute that, but again, the Svatantrika Madhyamaka are a little softer on that point than the Prasajika Madhyamaka. Okay. So let me get to where we are. Okay. So there are three things that Nagarjuna starts in his comment, in his poem here, to address. The first is he refutes existence things existing independently. And then at the same time, he's rejecting nihilism. Remember, I mentioned eternalism and nihilism. So the thing that things exist inherently is eternalistic. And he's pointing his main argument towards that because he's addressing the two realist schools to try to help them. He's just automatically denying nihilism. But those two viewpoints are two sides of the same coin, those two wrong views. When you assert things exist inherently, then at the same time you're kind of assenting that things can just not exist. Um, so one point is he's refuting that. Then the second thing that he's doing, he's refuting the teachings on the five heaps. He's refuting the realist idea that Buddha teaching about the five heaps that constitute a being, a human being or any being. He's refuting the thought that these five heaps exist inherently, and that's the thing that the two realist schools can't get past. And we'll get into why they have a hard time with that. Then the third thing he's going to do, he's going to go into what are the consequences that happen to us if we don't get this, if we don't understand it, and we cling to things as if they exist inherently. What's the downside to that? And so he's going to go into that point as well. So in Dume Kenser's commentary to this, he jumps right into the deep end. And he introduces, I mentioned the path of seeing, where beings see for themselves in deep meditation that there's no self nature to their body and mind. And that experience is called Namshak Yeshe, which can be translated as the wisdom Namshak, like deep absorbed wisdom, right? Namshak is deep meditation, and Yeshe is that wisdom that discerns how things really are. So those of you who know Zen and who also study some Hindu scriptures, have you ever heard somebody say that there is no mind? Have you ever heard that idea? You don't have to answer, I guess. But there's that idea. You'll come across it. And some people will say to be liberated, you have to get rid of mind and you have to get into no mind. The idea there is that some scholars believe that when your mind gets to the point of absorbing deeply into the meditation on emptiness, there is no mind. However, Gyaltsab Je and other scholars in this tradition refute that. They say that that's not actually true. There is an aspect of mind when the meditator goes deeply into emptiness and perceives it correctly. That aspect of mind could be said to conventionally exist. And it's called Nisume Belo, the non-dual mind that's experiencing emptiness directly. So even young children, even though they haven't learned a lot of language or concepts about reality, they still experience reality. They still experience things. And the hmm, as children get older, they learn how to label and how to categorize and all that kind of stuff from their parents and teachers. Um, Similarly, when you're in that state of non-dual wisdom, perceiving emptiness, for a moment, you're just having direct experience and you're not necessarily even um, cognizant that you're in that state, even though Galsum and others argue there is a mind there. And so it's in the next instant after that meditation ends that you come out of it that you realize, oh, I just saw emptiness. And it goes through a process. It's like a revolution of the mind when you perceive it directly. There's a process of trying to understand it. And so in the Eightfold Noble Path, they call that first step right view, and the second step right thought, like how to understand it and how to use it so that it um, informs your motivations for what you say and do. Um, until that point, and actually um, during that state of direct absorption into emptiness, as I say, it's called non dual mind. Before that experience, and then right after it, we have what's called in Tibetan yin nang, which means dualistic experience. There's a sense of this object, and there's an experience of me as the subject experiencing the object. That dualism, as I say, exists both before the path of seeing and after. The difference afterwards is that you know for yourself it's a false appearance. And so it starts to become illusory like that dualistic appearance. And then as you progress up the path of meditation, and then eventually to the path of full enlightenment called no more learning, that dualistic appearance subsides until it disappears completely in full enlightenment. All right. So, what's being gotten rid of in this process is what are called elaborations. I said this in our last class, but I wanted to spend a little time with it so that you're clear as we go forward. The Tibetan word is tru, or tripa. Um, our mind, Lama Yeshe used to say that we constantly are painting reality with our mind. And you can realize this if you watch your own mind. Every day there's a sense of experience, but also internally there's a sense of me and there's a sense of mine. And if you look at Western psychology, it spends a lot of time talking about this. What are people's self concept? How do people see themselves? And if you get really good at it in meditation, you'll start to be able to see in real time kind of a shadow self, where inside you at different levels, you're interpreting phenomena in reference to a sense of me and mine. And that's always happening. So that internal sense of me and mine is the object being refuted by Nagarjuna. He's saying if you really get into that internal representation of me and mine, it's a fabrication. It feels really real, right? But it's painting, it's mental construction, it's an elaboration, it's a projection of mind. And the problem with it is that it has a power to it because when we're sensing me and mine, there's also fear and anything that threatens that internal representation. There's anger and anything, any perceived injury to that sense of me and mine. There's desire and craving for wanting to increase the sense of mine and me. And then there's all the other afflictions like jealousy and pride and wrong views and everything else that come out of that. And so the problem is that constructionism, if you will, inside our mind is constantly creating karmic causes for suffering. And that's what's being talked about here by Nagarjuna in the first verse. You know, this is after the introductory verse, but this is the first real verse where he says, for those who are intelligent, Kangi Lodru, that sense of existence or non-existence, Namparde, they've completely transcended that. Shing Minepa, they're not abiding in between those two polar thoughts. Dedaki, by them, Gengi Dun, they understand the meaning of conditional. What is conditional existence? And so this verse is going to go into that rather deeply. So, materialists, I mentioned there are two extremes, eternalism and nihilism. Materialists are nihilists in a way because they don't believe in past and future lives. They don't believe in karma. They don't believe that there's such a thing as enlightenment. And so they've completely cut off the chance from a Buddhist point of view. They've cut off the chance of growing their spiritual faculties, their Buddha nature. They have Buddha nature, but their idea that there's no past and future lives, no karma, no enlightenment, that idea is preventing them from taking advantage of what they have so that they can enlighten their mind. So that's one extreme, and that's the sense meh, that things don't exist that actually do exist, right? They believe in material things, and they're quite good at understanding material phenomena. But in terms of understanding the mind and how it really works, not so much. So that's one extreme. The hearers, Shravakas, which are the two realist schools that Nagarjuna is addressing here, they're okay at not believing the nihilist view. They've gotten past that. However, when they hear this verse, they object. And one of their objections, well, before I do that, let me say one more thing about nihilists. Nagarjuna in the Ratnavali said that nihilists, because of their wrong view, not believing in the mind as a continuum, not believing in karma and enlightenment, in their next life, they tend to fall into lower realms of existence. And for this, I'm going to bring up an image, the Buddhist image of how that works. This is called the wheel of life. So those of you who are familiar with this will know all the different symbols and what they mean. You'll see on the upper right here that there's an image of the Buddha. He's pointing the way. This represents true paths out of suffering. And over here is a full moon that's free of clouds. And that represents the cessation of the afflictions of mind that cause suffering. And then here are the first two noble truths that Buddha taught: suffering and its causes. So you'll see a monster, and the monster is holding this circle in his teeth, in his talons. That monster represents our death. Once we're born, we're going to die. Nobody gets out alive. Um, Anything that is compounded and caused has the nature of impermanence, change, and then eventually it ends up falling apart. That's happening to us as we speak, right? None of us want to die. Everybody wants to go to heaven. Nobody wants to die. So we're caught in the fangs of this monster death. Inside it, on this outer edge, there are what are called the 12 nidanas, or the 12 links of dependent origination. And we'll get into that. Within um, that dependent arising are different states that we can be born in: heavenly realms, human realms, animal realms, hell realms, hungry spirit realms. These have been our abiding places from beginningless time, according to Buddhism. And inside that hub, there's a dark side. That represents when somebody dies with bad karma in their continuum. Those negative karma pull them down in existence into hideous rebirth. And so Nagarjuna is saying that nihilists tend to accumulate some really bad karma because of their views. And when they die, they tend to fall into really hideous states of being. Whereas eternalists, he said, because they believe in things like karma and causation and effects to your actions, like even let's say eternalists who believe there's a creator God who's going to judge the quick and the dead. That belief tends to cause them to try to create virtuous states of mind and do virtuous deeds. We can also see that some people make very unvirtuous deeds based on religious viewpoints, right? So it doesn't necessarily take you up, it can take you down if you have wrong views about your religion. But generally, that eternalist view, if you have kind of a proper understanding of, okay, if I do good, good things will happen to me. If I do bad things are going to come to me. Then that belief takes you up in existence, and that's represented by this white bardo intermediary state, where those virtuous deeds pull beings into higher realms. So Nagarjuna is saying to the realists, okay, yeah, you're definitely on track. You're going towards higher realms, but still, because you believe in self-existent aggregates, that belief in the causation that comes from it will keep you in this wheel. It'll keep you from transcending it. At the very hub of the wheel are three animals. There's a pig, and that pig represents ignorance, primordial ignorance. There are two types. One type is not understanding how cause and effect karma works, which is a relative type of ignorance. We're kind of walking blind through our lives, not sure whether our actions are creating positive things for ourselves or other negative things. And that ignorance is one of the things that binds us in this wheel. Deeper and more profound ignorance is clinging to our five aggregates as if they constitute a self, a me that exists from its own side. And then holding to our aggregates as mine. I own these aggregates. This is my body. This is my mind. Right? And that clinging to a self-existent me and mine is the hub that all karmic causation comes out of. Up here in the links, it's depicted as a blind man with a cane. He doesn't know where he's going, right? That's like us beginninglessly because of ignorance. We've been blindly stumbling through existence. The cane in his hand represents that ignorance is not only blind, but it's also unstable because it's not based on reality. You can easily knock it out from under the blind man and he'll fall, right? Similarly, because we don't have the wisdom of understanding how things are, that blindness is causing us to stumble in existence and create karma, which is the second link up here. Every moment of every day, we're having different thoughts, impulses, feelings, saying different things based on that, doing different things. All of those moments are karmic seeds that we're planting in our mind. Here, the depiction is somebody making pots out of clay. You can take a lump of clay and you can shape it into anything. You can shape it into a bowl. You could shape it into a statue of a deity if you want. You could shape it into an animal shape, right? Similarly, moment by moment, those impulses, thoughts, and attitudes and actions that come out of them are creating karmic seeds that have the potential to direct our continuum when we die into a whole lifetime, in a whole realm of existence. And we don't know it, we're blind to it, right? But when we're based on ignorance, then our karmic actions are being made without any sense of where they're taking us. And then I'll get into the other links and how those karmic seeds are carried throughout the lifetime until we die, and then they produce effects. So out of this pig's mouth, there are two animals coming out. One's a rooster that represents craving, constantly that sense of me and mine produces a sense of I want this, I want that, mostly sensory desires, also mental desires. And so constantly that craving binds us in this wheel of existence. And then also coming out is a snake, which represents hate or anger, fear, that sense of I don't want that. And so we're warding off constantly the things we don't want and get angry at anything that threatens our sense of self. So that's at the hub. And as long as this is the state of mind we're in, we're cycling in and out of death and rebirth, mostly, unfortunately, in states of suffering. And that's why it's so important from a Buddhist view to get rid of the root cause, which is this ignorance, the blindness that we've been locked in from beginningless time that causes us to create causes to go in and out of existence. This conditional existence that we're in is what's being referred to by the word ken. Gengi Dun means understanding what's meant by conditional. I'll go back to the English for those of you who are comfortable with English. So those whose intellect transcends being and nothing and does not dwell between realize the meaning of condition. That's our samsaric condition, which is profound and non-perceived. So the profound and non-perceived part, non-perceived is the word, let me find the correct Tibetan word. Actually, I'll just go to the Tibetan over here. Samo means profound, and that's talking about emptiness. Mikmei is what was translated by Joseph as non-perceived. I think that's a confusing translation, to be honest. Mikmei means without object. So really what's being stated by that word by Nagarjuna himself is that all of these things that we cling to as me and mine don't really ultimately have a self-essential nature to them. It's like we're clinging at clouds that are changing and have no substance to them. Um, and the lack of inherent nature is their profound nature, their emptiness. And when we can see through our projections of thinking of them as having a self-existent nature, then we see that they are without object. There's no objective basis to the dreamlike phenomena we're swimming with that we cling to in this cycle of existence. Now, I know that, again, the wise have thoroughly realized it this way, and therefore they've become completely disillusioned with samsaric pleasures and, all the things you see in the world. People trying to become uber rich, people trying to become famous, people trying to preserve themselves by killing other people or stealing their things. All of this, it's all like a bad dream from a Buddhist point of view. It has no essential nature to it. And we don't have to be in the middle of it. You don't have to keep creating causes so that that's where we end up in that horrible state. That's what's being said by Nagarjuna.
Wilson, this is Sharon. I have a quick question, and it's sort of related to the Tibetan language because when you're translating back and forth, they use the word non or no frequently. Because I do the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. There's two long passages where there's no mind, there's no speech, no body, no. And so I because I've taken some Tibetan, I know that they use the negative to refute something, but it doesn't mean an absolute, it's not that either. Is that sort of what you're getting at here?
Yes, yes. And that's basically the argument between the realists and Nagarjuna. Because when the realists hear the Madhyamaka point of view, they fall into nihilistic thoughts inappropriately, because that's not what Nagarjuna means. What their thought goes to is, oh, you're saying there's no mind. You're saying there's no causation. You're saying there's no samsara, right? And then they come back, well, why did Buddha teach about the Four Noble Truths if you're saying they don't exist? And Nagarjuna is saying very gently, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying they don't exist, right? That's what I'm saying doesn't exist. And this is why I spent some time with this. What doesn't exist is that object of negation, our mental imputation of self nature onto things. That's the object, that's the target that Nagarjuna is refuting. So in the Perfection of Wisdom, when it says no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue,
Right,
right?
right.
It's saying there's no self-existent eye, no self-existent hearing, no self-existent nose. And if you look into it even scientifically, you can tell that that's true. Our eyes depend on lots of things to support eyesight, don't they?
Oh, yes.
And if
It's
any of those,
80% of our brain, even
yeah,
scientifically, but it's the translation of all of that that we do that, and I realize, well, I do that sutra every day because, I try to seek wisdom. So it's a good sutra for me to practice. But
it is.
so my point is, it's the no and non, it's not like totally literal when they
Right,
refute it.
right.
Okay,
There's
gotcha. Thank
there's this
you.
there's a sense in Perfection of Wisdom that if you don't get a good commentary and you just read it, it's like grabbing a poisonous snake the wrong way, right?
Yes, I've spent much time meditating with it. I don't just take it literally.
Which is why it's so useful to get a commentary like Nagarjuna's and check
Yes,
it
this is
quickly.
really good. I really like this.
because they get it very specific. Okay, here's what we're saying doesn't exist, and we're not saying this doesn't exist, right? So in his statement that the wise understand conditional existence, Nagarjuna, in fact, is supporting the realists in following the Four Noble Truths. He's supporting their view of samsaric existence as being the way it was described by the Buddha. What he's not supporting is their imputation of self nature to any parts of it, because that's the mistaken notion of ignorance that's driving the whole thing. And that's what Nagarjuna is trying to slice out, right?
So, Mr. Wilson, this is Jeev. I have a question. So, this object of negation, um, it does exist, though. Like when you're meditating, the object does exist, though. For a starter, ordinary people like myself, is that correct?
Well, it's you could say that at a relative level, people think that they have a self that is self-existent, right? And it exists at that level. However, it doesn't have an ultimate nature to it. It's a mistaken notion. So it's a little bit like somebody who has a cataract. Let's say they have a cataract where they're seeing hairs. That's one form of cataract. You could say, yeah, they're seeing hair-like things. But on another hand, compared to somebody who doesn't have a cataract, that vision is impaired. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. But what I'm saying, I was approaching more from the line from a meditative experience. Like you grabbed, you're fair. I was fearful, and I was able to grab that sensation, a lump somewhere, and that is actually existing within me.
Yeah, yeah. It's existing, but not self-existing. Does that
Right.
make
So now,
sense?
now the analyzation, now the criticality of how does it exist is the next step there. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In what way? And in fact, Nagarjuna is going to go on to say as much. Um, Let me just take it to the next verse. I think we have time. Yeah, we have time. Because he starts to get into those exact kinds of questions in his commentary. Really good questions that you're asking. So let's just go to the next verse in which he addresses nihilism. You who have eliminated nihilism, the source of all ills, should attend to the reason why absolutism must be rejected as well. So here he's being clear. If your understanding of what I'm saying is to deny things exist, then you're not understanding because that's the source of all ills. And so what he is addressing though is the sense of absolutism on the part of realists, and that he's saying is also a problem. So here in the Tibetan, uh, Rechi Kun, the source of all bad things, all faults, Jue Ne, the source of it all, is Meni. Meni is nihilism, the sense that things don't exist at all. And Nampar Doksin Yi, those who you've totally turned away from nihilism, he's saying, have turned back to the source of all ills. Rigpe, um, how did uh, how did that get translated by Lorenzo? Reasoning. Uh, so Rigpa, in this case, reasoning with reasoning. Gangi, whoever is reasonable. Yunyi is absolutism or eternalism. Dong, Dopargyur, Yembargi, you should listen and you should turn away from absolutism as well. And so, in response to Jeeves' question, so as long as you hold the mistaken notion of an independent self as real, for that long it has hold over you. But if you use your reasoning to see through it, and then it's an illusion in your mind, then you're freeing yourself.
So that's where the chipping of the layers coming in, right, Mr. Wilson? So what we're saying is, every time you deal with that object of negation, you're getting more and more. You're chipping away with the layers and layers of confusion. That's the chipping.
Yeah,
Uh, so it's a one-time effort. Like that doesn't sound true to me. It sounds like you constantly need to come across various scenarios, various conditions when these things is like when you get calmer and calmer and start observing more of these object of negations during different conditions. So this whole thing about, oh, I suddenly saw an emptiness, that doesn't sound true to me.
yeah. I remember when I was in college, I was sharing a house with some roommates, and one of them had driven across country in a hearse. He was a sculpture guy, and he was trying to convince all of us that he had seen the absolute reality of things and he was enlightened. And I didn't buy it. And I was right. I didn't know why I didn't buy it, but I was right. Yeah, even, somebody who's hit the path of seeing and has seen reality directly, still, they have not rid their mind of the different causes of suffering. That's a long process. You have to see it not only once, but you have to see it again and again and again until you slowly wear down the propensity of seeing things in that mistaken way. And so it's a long process, arduous process.
And the other fact is, like, the more and this is my personal experience, the more non-conceptual you can stay in your meditation, um, day in and day out, or whatever many sittings that you do, uh, the better the object of negation becomes.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. You
you,
get more and more clear about it the more you meditate because you can see what's happening at the deeper levels of your mind when you're clinging to me, right?
right. So this thing probably I'm sharing with the rest of the group is like the non-conceptual. What I mean by that is like, you build certain amount of calm in you, the samatha, not exactly the samatha, the pinnacle of it, but you build certain level of it as you keep on doing your meditation. And there, in my case, what I did was I used a couple of um, bone tradition side of stuff where we talk about using upper wind, lower winds, and stuff like that. And I find it pretty easy just using the upper wind. You have a circular motion of your head 5 times in one direction, 5 times in other direction, holding your breath, and then 5 times up and down. And I don't know, and I, it's my experimentation. I stumbled into it. I find it like you can actually fabricate non-conception that way.
Well, there are advanced techniques in Buddhism as well, for calming the mind through working with the breath and working with how we visualize ourselves and things like that. But they're all directed at that dual goal of calming the mind and seeing things as they are, right? The combination of calm abiding and wisdom.
Right,
And so, yeah, what works for you, that's good.
right.
If it works for you, use it, right? Um, okay, so let me see. um, in his commentary to the verse I just went through, for those who have eliminated nihilism,
Right. It's just trying different.
What? I missed what you said. I'm sorry, G.
Oh no, I was saying, just sharing the experience, and each to its own. I mean, something would work for somebody, something wouldn't work for somebody, but
Yeah,
you should
exactly.
experiment. That's my recommendation.
And there are tons of techniques. I mean, it's just amazing the number of different strategies to get to clear insight, clarity and
Right.
insight. And so again, what works for you is good. Um,
Yeah. Thank
so
you.
anyway, this verse, you who have eliminated nihilism, the source of all ills, should attend to the reasons why absolutism must be rejected as well. And in the commentary to this, um, Jimmy Kentzer Rinpoche talked a little bit about the wheel of life that I showed you. And what he said, he did get into the links that I was showing you. In particular, the first two links I showed you: ignorance, the blind man, and within that ignorance, karma is formed, and that's represented here by the man who's making pots out of clay. Those first two links in this discussion of rebirth have come from previous lives. Those two things are what threw the karma for us to be born in our current condition. Um, the third link here, which is consciousness, through 9, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All of these links, um, these next 6 links, um, are occurring in this life. And so I'm just going to go through them and what they are. Ignorance and karma were carried by consciousness. Consciousness includes the last moment of our previous life through the bardo into the formation of this life. Each moment when we have a thought, when we have a feeling, when we have an action, these 3 links are being created. They're immature karma, if you will. But these next 6 links are going to show how immature karma becomes mature. So whatever karmic propensities came in with our mind, here's consciousness represented as a monkey who's eating fruit. And as he's eating fruit, the seeds are dropping in the ground, producing new growth, right? And so our mental continuums came into our mother's womb filled with karmic causation from previous existence. As we grew in the womb, which is represented here by a boat with 4 passengers, this is called name and form. The boat represents the body growing in the womb of our mother, and the passengers are our feeling heap, our conceptual heap, our formational heap, and our consciousness heap. Those 5 factors, the 5 heaps of the new life, are growing in the womb based on previous karma. And that's bringing in all the karmic propensities that we accumulated previously. This next link, you see a house with empty windows. And that represents in the fetal formation, sense powers start to develop. And you can see this actually, now with in vitro imaging, you can see how the fetus starts to develop eyes, ears, the nose, the mouth, and they start to react if scientists shine a light in there or they put something sour, they can see the fetus react. And so it's clear that it's sensing what's happening to it. And that's represented here. These windows are representing the doors of perception of the fetal, the embryo as it grows. Here is called Reksha, and it's two lovers in embrace. And it represents when the parts of the mind start to engage with the sense powers that are forming in the fetus. The mind has, according to Tantric Sautrantika school, has 6 main minds. There's mental consciousness, and then the 5 sensory minds. Awareness of sights, sounds, smells, taste, and touch. And so as those mental components of those 6 senses engage with their respective sense powers, you get contact, feeling. Contact, Reksha. That contact between the sense faculties and their awarenesses produces feeling, which is the next link. Here's a guy with an arrow in his eye. Ouch. And you can see this with young infants, they're very, Piaget found that there's concrete operations, he called it, when young infants get this ability to kind of experience things. And they're very into this tastes good or this doesn't taste good, right? Or I like how that looks, but I don't like how that looks. And you can see them react to their sense powers as they engage with their environment, right? And so negative experiences causes aversion, anger, fear. Positive experiences lead to craving, which is the next link. Initial craving. Here's a guy sipping a beer. Oh, that tastes good. I think I'll have another one, right? And so when the craving kicks in, then desire starts to grow. And this is all taking those karmic propensities and it's making them more and more strong in the continuum of the being. And so with that initial desire, as the person pursues whatever habits their karma draws them into, it becomes strong craving, represented here in the 9th link by a monkey going for a piece of fruit. And that's when our desires cause us to really formulate goals of what we want or don't want. And that strong craving, all of these links 3 through 9, take immature karma from past lives and develop into very potent karma, ready to give a fruit, ready to give a result in our mind, which leads to the 10th link. And these next 3 links are what form a future life out of this life. This is a pregnant woman, a woman ready to give birth. And that's that ripened karma now becoming and shaping what we're going to become, because it's taken over our being, if you will. Then the next link is birth, a woman giving birth, when that ripened karma, then at the time of death, seeks out what we're going to become. And once we're born into a new life, then the links go on. And because we're born, we're going to die. And so the last link is death, a person being hauled off to a funeral ground. So this is our condition. And that's what Nagarjuna is saying, that the wise perceive. The wise see that that's what happens to us lifetime after lifetime in cyclic existence. All right. How much time do we? Should I try one more verse? not to leave you stuck in samsara. All right, let's go to the third verse. If things were really true, as the naive construe them to be, then why not accept their nothingness as liberation? So here, Nagarjuna is starting to poke holes in the eternalist views of the realists. You know, their objection to Nagarjuna is, okay, if these things don't inherently exist, they go one step too far and they think you're saying they don't exist. So their accusation to Nagarjuna is you're saying that Buddha's teaching about the cyclical existence is false, that there's no suffering or cause of suffering or end of suffering or path to suffering. And of course, that's not what Nagarjuna is saying at all. He's saying that it doesn't inherently exist that way. It's dependently arisen and has no self nature to it, and therefore it can be ended. If it had self nature, it would always be that way. However, the realists are still not understanding. And so he goes to this next verse. If things were really true, as you're asserting, realists, and he's calling them naive because he sees it as kind of a childlike point of view, then why not accept that the end of being is liberation, right? That's the natural consequence of that thought. And so get into the Tibetan just a little bit, and we'll have to go into this verse a little bit more next time we meet. Jitar, just as Chipe means childish, those who haven't seen reality as it really is. Nantakshin, as they conceive them as permanent, as existing from their own side. Musugalte, those entities, real entities, Galte, if they were that way, then Yurna, if that was the truth, then the non-existence of those entities, namtar, would be liberation. So in other words, if you're saying that the five heaps are truly existent and that they exist from their own side, then the destruction of those five heaps would be liberation. That's pretty much what you're implying by your stance, which is an absurd conclusion, actually. Gangi, one who holds it this way, Shik is, why wouldn't that be true? Why wouldn't it be true that if you're saying things must exist inherently, that their non-existence would be nirvana? Wouldn't that be what you're saying? And so he's getting into a deeper debate. I know we should probably stop, but let's go ahead and stop there and see if you have any questions. Have I lost you all? I'll go ahead and dedicate the virtues, and then we can debate a little bit more. Sashi Buki Juchi Medaka Rira Linji Medaka Sangi Shindu Meda Anda Shinga Chibasho Idungu Anamanda Lagame Yatayami Yawati Yawokun Sunamiya Zozo Sunamiya Leju Damba Kuni Tobasho Jonju Zenjo Rinpoche, Banya Banange Gechi, Yapa Mebaya, Nubel Washu, Kari Rawe Goe, Shikan, sheep. All right. Did I lose everybody at the end?
No, I don't.
Still on some of these nuances in the argument between eternalists and correct view. And so it's going to get heady. But on the other hand, Yume Khensa Rinpoche and Art have a really good way of making things that are hard to understand understandable. And so I hope that I hope I won't confuse you or myself as we go forward, and it'll get more and more understandable. All right. So
I have an inclination that to reify the mental continuum. Oof.
yeah, a lot of people do. Like if you I think it was Catch 22, Kurt Vonnegut, where he finally arrives that the consciousness must be what the being is, right? A lot of people arrive at that conclusion. And so it's not an unusual conclusion. But of course, the Madhyamaka question would be this moment of your mental continuum, what caused it? Right? And when you start thinking that way, you can't assert that the mental continuum exists on its own. It too is a continuum with its previous moments, current moments, future moments, right?
Yeah. I want to talk more. I mean, I would like to explore more about that, because it feels like I'm starting to get more and more the aggregates, right? And that I exist, like this. There's label Marisa. I'm increasingly more and more. That's why I'm happier, right? I'm happier. I feel more serene. I don't get caught up in this drama, right? But there's still something that maybe is that I go myself to consciousness, but then I'm like, okay, so I am like somehow a localization of all there is, it's like am I a manifestation of inseparably wisdom, like, and we are all that, and we're all the same, and we are love and ineffable, like, is it that? So that's what I'm.
Well, it's certainly close to our goal. I think our goal is in this path, is to shed the incrustations of past habits and karma that have caused us to have our afflictions the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can shed all that, just like the Buddha did, we can become closer to an enlightened being. And we have that potential. We just have to know how to do it, and to imbue our mind with loving kindness and compassion and enlightened qualities, so that we become more and more similar to all enlightened beings. At our ultimate nature, there's no difference from us and a Buddha.
Exactly. So we don't graduate out from being human, and we are we just have this incarnation right now. So we might, we have to do the best we can to get this. So thank you for the teachings. Oh my goodness, please.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I felt so fortunate from Serme Khensa Rinpoche and then Yume Khensa Rinpoche and other great lamas who have kind of seen this for themselves and sorted it out. It's really lucky that we ran into them. So I agree.
Yeah, I feel that's what I've been getting, like a lot of gratitude for the teachings, like a lot of gratitude for, like they just took care of putting or teaching,
Yeah, it's like I was running blind before I bumped into Lama Yeshe. I felt like it's almost like, okay, I'll save this hippie from himself. took us under wing and
Okay, it's not
slowly.
time for anything.
So anyway, I agree. All right, well, probably this class will be in the new year, but I'll see some of you before then. So take
Be
care.
well, Wilson.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Hope you feel
You guys
better.
too. Thanks.